Hi, everyone. Welcome to our program. This is English Digest, and I'm Tom.
Hi, I'm Stephanie.
And we're nearing the end of the year. And, of course, Chinese New Year will be coming soon after New Year.
Yeah.
And, of course, we're all going to be getting ready and preparing for food. We're going to be looking forward to all the big meals we're going to have during Chinese New Year. But we're talking about something that is kind of unique to Taiwan, a way to describe food or the quality of the food here in some cases. And they use an English letter to describe this food. Do you know what letter it's talking about?
Yeah, Q, which is kind of interesting. I'm not sure why. Maybe you can explain that, or the article will. But I remember the first time I had a friend say, yeah, it's very QQ. And I'm like, what is QQ? What does that mean? So, yeah, we're going to be talking about this particular texture. I would say it's a texture, the feel of a food.
Right, not the taste so much, just the texture, the kind of feel of it. And that is important. We're going to find out as our lesson continues, not just the taste of food, but the feel of it in your mouth and what it does to you. It's all part of the eating experience. So let's find out about the curious case of Q. Let's read through the entire contents of our lesson for today right now.
As twilight falls, the night market lights up, and vendors begin to busy themselves with their ingredients. Hungry diners debate which of the delightful choices they'll sample first. Noodle dishes, fish meatballs, pearl milk tea. All of these popular treats have something in common: Q. The letter appears on many stall signs, but even when it doesn't, its name will be heard as appreciative customers endeavor to describe the positive characteristics of the foods they've purchased. Calling something Q, or QQ for emphasis, highlights its bouncy, chewy texture, which amplifies flavor and intensifies eaters' enjoyment. It can be hard for visitors to Taiwan to understand what Q is and what is so appealing about it. For people who haven't grown up with cuisines that prize texture as an element of flavor, a problem arises when they encounter something Q. They just don't have the familiarity to appreciate it. This is complicated by the fact that Q actually describes textures that range from the soft chewiness of mochi all the way to the firmness of beef tendons that almost resist the teeth. This variety can overwhelm outsiders to the world of Q. No matter how Q something is, though, it's a quality that's considered essential for certain dishes to reach the heights of their deliciousness. The letter Q represents a word from Hokkien, also known as Taiwanese, that is pronounced almost the same as the English letter Q. However, enjoyment of Q is not limited to Taiwan. Food from all around Asia explores the variety of chewy, firm, and bouncy textures that are expressed by calling something Q. In Singapore, Indonesia, and Malaysia, kuih lapis is a cute little rice cake that has delicately flavored layers. Equally important to its fame is the cake's springy texture, another example of Q.
Okay, let's talk about our article for today. The title is The Curious Case of Q. This is a catchy title here because all these words start with a K sound. The Curious Case of Q. And it does seem to be unique to Taiwan and other countries in Asia here. And our first paragraph begins by saying, as twilight falls, the night market lights up and vendors begin to busy themselves with their ingredients. So we're establishing a situation here or a scene. It's during twilight. Twilight is the time when day is turning into night. It's also sometimes referred to as dusk or sundown, but twilight is that period of time. So twilight falls, which means night is coming, although there still is some sunlight in the sky. I would say that the sun has just set.
I would agree with that. Of course, there was the famous series of books called the Twilight series, right? With all the vampires. I did not read those. I thought they were silly. Sorry for
Not
those.
my thing either.
Yeah,
but...
Sorry for those of you out there who enjoyed them. So when twilight falls, of course, the night markets really get busy. That's when they start preparing their dishes and people start showing up to maybe eat their evening meal there or a little later if they just want a snack. I love the night markets in Taiwan. So they light up, meaning, they turn on the lights, they're busy. And here we're using the word busy as a verb, which we usually don't. It's usually just an adjective. I'm so busy this week. But typically we use that phrase there to busy oneself with something. Hungry diners debate which of the delightful choices they'll sample first. So maybe you've gone with friends to the night market before and, you have a conversation about which stall you want to go visit first, and then you go for it. And you usually visit all of them. So if you debate something, you just talk about some sort of issue and you might have a different opinion than somebody else. And at the end of it, hopefully they've convinced you of their viewpoint or maybe you've convinced them. But I would say just go visit all the stalls you like. The night market just has too many delicious dishes.
Exactly. Here we're talking about people discussing what they're going to eat for dinner if they're going to the night market. Of course, there are lots of choices. And if you're sampling something or just trying something, you don't have to fill yourself with that meal. That's the beauty of the night market. You can eat all sorts of stuff before you're full. And what can we get at a night market? Well, noodle dishes, fish, meatballs, pearl milk tea. All of these popular treats have something in common. Q. Okay, so yes, noodle dishes, dishes that are made with noodles. They might have a little of that consistency or that texture.
Yeah.
Also, meatballs made from fish. And then, of course, the old standard pearl milk tea, which I don't really drink anymore because it's just way too sweet for me. But I guess if you're young and growing up and if you don't have to worry about those things, pearl milk tea might be a real treat.
Yeah, I don't drink it either, but it's still very popular, especially among the younger crowds. So the letter appears on many stall signs. So if you go to the night market, you'll see stalls there. There are stands or booths that are set up for a vendor to sell whatever they're making. And if you have a sign at the top, usually it announces what you're selling, or you have the title of your dish up there, or maybe you've given your stall a name. So they have these signs on the stalls that sometimes will actually add the letter Q, so people know that whatever they're selling has a very QQ texture.
Exactly. So, yes, you'll see those signs on the stalls which tell you what they have. And, of course, the name will be heard as appreciative customers endeavor to describe the positive characteristics of the foods they've purchased. That's part of the fun of eating out. You get to describe the food, or you get to experience the food because it has all sorts of different textures. Q is the one we're talking about today, but there are other textures as well. Maybe it's kind of slimy or crunchy or soft or whatever.
Oh, I like crunchy.
But we are talking about Q in today, and certain stalls sell food that is very Q. We don't really have that word in English, though. You'd have to use a different word. Here in Taiwan, if you say Q, of course, most foreigners will know what that means, but they will not know what you're talking about if you're in Berlin, for example.
No, they really won't. So here it says its name will be heard as appreciative customers endeavor to describe the positive characteristics of the foods they purchased. And endeavor is one of our vocabulary words, guys. It just means to try very hard to do something or to achieve something. It can be a verb. He endeavored to climb Mount Everest. Or it could be a noun. I have several endeavors that I am working very hard on achieving this summer. You could use it either, again, as a verb or a noun. Here, of course, it's being used as a verb. They endeavor to do something. They try to describe or endeavor to describe the positive characteristics. Characteristics is just some of the traits that something has. A person can have certain characteristics. They might be very funny, very smart, very kind. But food can have different characteristics. It could be spicy. It could be QQ. It could be mushy or slimy. These are characteristics. They're features or qualities of something that help describe it, or they help identify what something is.
Exactly, and indeed, this is used to describe something that's bouncy or chewy. It has a bouncy and chewy texture. I guess chewy would come pretty close. This food is very chewy.
Yeah.
Sort of like chewing gum, except it will actually break down in your mouth and you can swallow it like tapioca balls in that tea we were talking about, pearl milk tea. And, of course, this amplifies flavor and intensifies eaters' enjoyment. So, yes, indeed, if you're eating something that is QQ or chewy or bouncy, then it kind of makes the flavor even more noticeable. To amplify something, at least with a stereo, with sound, it means to make the sound louder. I can't hear the TV. Can you turn up the volume? Can you amplify the sound? And this amplifies the flavor. It makes the flavor more noticeable, and it will also intensify your enjoyment. It will make it an experience you will never forget.
Right. Now, remember, sometimes you'll hear people say Q. Other times you'll hear people say QQ. I hear people say QQ more often. Or as Tom just said, QQ duh. Here they use QQ, it says, for emphasis. Emphasis here is a noun. It just means you're putting special importance on something, or you're highlighting something, you're giving something prominence, you're pointing something out. Now remember, this is the noun form. Emphasis. Notice the S sound. But if it's a verb, you emphasize something. It's not quite the same, sorry. English is a little crazy that way. So emphasize is the verb. Emphasis is the noun.
Yep, I want to emphasize this word. I want to give it some emphasis.
There you go.
To make sure you understand what it means. And yes, indeed, it does highlight the flavor of the food you're eating. Let's take a break right now and listen to our Chinese teacher, but stay tuned. We'll be right back.
听众朋友大家好，我是安娜。我们今天跟明天会带大家来看看 Q 这个东西。Q 这个东西不是字母 Q 啦，是说我们东西很有嚼劲的那个 Q。好，这个 Q 呢，其实在台湾我们就很熟悉啊，什么东西都要 Q 啊，波霸奶茶的波霸要 Q 啊，然后吃什么东西讲起来很 Q。可是啊，其实这个 Q 到底是什么意思啊 ？Q 在英文当中啊，西方人是很难理解的。我们先来看一下第一段，外国人觉得很怪的这种 Q 感。第一段的第4句当中啊，我们出现这个 Q 这个字啊，因为其实它是从那个闽南语来的啦，可是我们通常都会用英文的 Q， 在夜市当中的很多的招牌上面就是会看到。好，那这一句啊，第4句的地方感觉上有一点复杂，我们来看一下 the letter 后面逗点之后看到一个 but， 我们先打个斜线。也就是说，句子虽然长啊，如果我们看到连接词的时候，就直接打斜线，就可以稍微把句子分开。好，即便是招牌上面没有 Q 这个字，但是 Q 呢，还是有很多人会很想要去描述买来的食物，觉得很好吃，就会用 Q 这个字。好，所以 but 之后，我们看到的是 but even when it doesn't。这边的 doesn't 指的是 doesn't appear， 就算是没有出现在招牌上，后面句子当中有一个 as， 先把它抓出来。在这里的 as 根据文意来推测的话，它其实是 when 的意思跟功能哦。因为在 as 之后，我们看到了一个动词叫做 endeavor to do something， 很努力的描述一件事情，很努力的去做一件事情。所以这里的 as 它是连接词，是 when 的意思。当我们想要描述说这个东西很好吃，通常也会讲说很 Q。好，所以最后面呢，这句话为什么会这么长？其实它也是因为带了一个关系子句。关系子句是限定用法的，而且关系词省略，所以你会觉得这句话好长，然后不知道怎么截断。最后面的先行词是 the foods， 就是这些食物。哪些食物呢？就是他们买到的这些食物。从 they 可以左括号，句尾右括号，省略的是关系词 which 或者是 that。那么 which 或 that 为什么可以省略呢？因为这个关系词在括号自己的关系子句当中当受词。哪一个字的受词啊？就是 purchase， 就是买这个字的受词。所以对他们自己买的食物，那当然关系词 which 或 that 就代替的是 the foods， 也就是买的受词啊。这个时候关系词可以省略，那就是所谓的 Q， 反正总而言之就是很有弹性啦，很有嚼劲啦，然后呢会让我们觉得很好吃。不过第一段的最后第5句也有一个关系子句哦，它是非限定用法补充说明的。先行词是 its bouncy chewy texture， 逗点之后的 which 代替它，那这样子的一个口感amplifies 就可以放大大家对于食物的一种 flavor 风味的一种享受。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, guys. We are focused on food for the next couple of lessons, and we're going to be turning our attention to the curious case of Q. Now, we're talking about sometimes you see this scene we're setting in the first paragraph. You know, the sun goes down and the night market lights up. Wherever it is, we have night markets in different areas all over Taiwan. And that's when the vendors begin to get busy or busy themselves with their ingredients. They start making their dishes of food. And you've got lots of choices. You've got noodle dishes, fish meatballs, pearl milk tea. All of these are popular treats in Taiwan. And they also have the same type of texture. And we call that texture Q or QQ. And for me, I think of Q2 as just bouncy. Like when I bite into something, my teeth will bounce up. That's how I think of it, especially with those tapioca balls. I don't drink a lot of tea, but yeah, I'm used to the tapioca balls. They're not my favorite thing, but that's very QQ. It's chewy sometimes, and it says here at the bottom of the first paragraph, it can amplify or increase the flavor and intensity of the eater's enjoyment. So that special texture actually makes the food taste better to a lot of people.
Come to think of it, years ago I was eating something that was QQ-y.
Yeah.
And it made one of my fillings come out of my teeth. That was kind of weird. It kind of stuck to it and then it came out, but that's an extreme case.
That's kind of like caramel candy in America.
Sort of, yeah. It does have a little sticky quality to it. I guess it depends on what you're eating. And here in the next paragraph it says, it can be hard for visitors to Taiwan to understand what Q is and what is so appealing about it. So you've got a client, Mr. Wilson, has come from Canada and you're going to do a business deal with him, but you thought, hey, I'm going to introduce him to some of the traditions of Taiwan. I'm going to take him to a night market and I'm going to introduce him to something QQ-y, that's what I'm going to say, or kind of soft and bouncy. And Mr. Wilson's going to go, what is that? What does that mean? What does Q mean? That is really unusual.
So for people who haven't grown up with cuisines that prize texture as an element of flavor, a problem arises when they encounter something Q. Yeah, for the people over here in Asia, the texture of a type of food is also an important part of a dish's success. It can't just be, all the same texture. Actually, though, if you watch cooking competition shows like I do, you know that if you present a dish to the judges that's just one texture, they will mark you down. They will take off points. They want different types of textures in that dish so it doesn't get boring. Well, Q gives us that. So if you have that texture of Q where it's bouncy or chewy, it seems to increase the flavor of the dish. Here it says a problem arises when people who aren't familiar with this texture encounter or come across something Q. If a problem arises or something arises, it comes up. So, you could be working on a project and suddenly your boss calls you in and says, oh, a problem has arisen or a problem has arose. So a problem has come up, it's now in front of you and you have to face it. So a problem arises or you have to face this issue when people who aren't familiar with what Q is come into contact with it or when they have their first experience with Q.
Right, they just don't have the familiarity to appreciate it. So if something's familiar, you know about it, you've heard about it before, it's not the first time you've been introduced to this thing. Although you don't totally understand it, you're familiar with it, and the noun form of the adjective familiar is familiarity. So yes, foreigners from overseas don't have the familiarity to appreciate QQ food or QQE food.
Right.
And this is complicated by the fact that Q actually describes textures that range from the soft chewiness of mochi all the way to the firmness of beef tendons that almost resist the teeth. So there's a range of this quality, and mochi is kind of mushy, it's kind of soft, but I guess you would still describe it as being QQE. And then that's the range. That's at one end of the spectrum, and you go all the way to the other side, and you've got beef tendons. Now, tendons are in the body. They are what connect your muscles to your bones. And, of course, we're talking about tendons from animals, cows or pigs or whatever. And those are also described as Q or QQE, but they're a little harder than mochi. So, yes, it includes a range of foods that range in their Qiness, if I can say that.
You just did. So this variety or this type can overwhelm outsiders to the world of Q. Yeah, the tendons, I remember the first time I had beef noodle soup and I had some of those tendons in the soup and I thought, what in the world? We would leave this part out in America. We wouldn't put it in because it's almost impossible to chew, right? You just chew and chew and chew. Or like the chicken feet, people will kind of gnaw on that, that foot. And I thought, there's nothing here to eat. Why are they eating that foot like that? That's gross. But we've all got different cultures, We all are used to different types of things, especially with food. So if something overwhelms you, maybe you're at work and your boss is just giving you too much stuff to do and you feel overwhelmed. If you're overwhelmed, you have too much to handle. You feel like you just want to quit and give up. Or maybe your emotions have overwhelmed you at some point. We try not to cry at school or work. You don't want people to see you cry. But sometimes your emotions just become too much. They overwhelm you. And you need to cry. So it's just too much of something. It can be a strong emotion. It could be too much work, too much pressure, stress, anything that gets to be too much.
Right, it can be overwhelming for people who are not used to food of this quality. And no matter how Q something is, though, it's a quality that's considered essential for certain dishes to reach the heights of their deliciousness. And yes, indeed, for some people, the quality of Q is very important. If it isn't Q enough, then it's a failure as a dish. If it's too much Q, then that is a failure as well. So it has to be just the right amount of Q.
So the letter Q represents a word from Hokkien. We call it Taiwanese Taiyu. And that's pronounced almost the same as the English letter Q. That's where this comes from. I used to always wonder, why are they calling it Q? However, it says enjoyment of Q is not limited to Taiwan. You could try food from other Asian areas and you'll also see that type of chewy, bouncy, firm texture that we call Q. So here's some examples in Singapore, Indonesia, and Malaysia. Something called kui lapis or lapis We're not sure how they say it. It's a cute little rice cake. We do have rice cakes here, but this one has delicately flavored layers. A layer is a very thin level, and you just keep putting one layer on top of another. If you make a cake, you probably have different layers of cake and then frosting and then cake and frosting.Well, this particular little rice cake is very cute. So it's got that springy texture. So if you find yourself traveling to these other Asian countries, you might check out this particular little rice cake and see how they describe Q.Right,
there's another word to describe Q there, springy.
Yeah.
Again, we got bouncy, and what was the other word?
Chewy.
Indeed. So springy is like a spring, doing, doing, doing. So I guess that would describe Q. Some of you may disagree, but in any case, that is an example of Q food, and I'm sure lots of different dishes around the world have this quality as well. We're going to continue talking about Q food in our next program. Join us then, but for now, before we say goodbye, we're going to listen to our Chinese teacher.
所以来台湾的观光客啊，就很难了解说 Q 是什么东西，因为在西方当中就没有特别一直吃 Q 的东西，所以他们吃到 Q 的东西的时候会觉得怪怪的，也没办法理解，就是为什么什么东西一定要 Q 呢？好，第二段的第二句我们来看一下，他一开始说 For people who， 我们要有一个警觉，看到 people who 就是那些什么什么的人。不过在这边的 who 啊，它带着还蛮长的。如果你把 who 左括号的话，右括号会在逗点这个地方哦。先行词当然是 people， 对于那些什么什么的人来说，为什么 who 到逗点这边会这么长？其实它夹了一个小的限定用法关系子句。先行词是 cuisines， 就是这些美食。后面的 that 一样打逗点到 flavors 右边这个地方。那么既然不知道怎么样来描述这样子的一个 Q 感的话呢，它到底该怎么办呢？因为其实 Q 我们会说麻糬很 Q， 或者是牛腱很 Q， 所以对西方人来说他们是很难理解的。同样在第二段第四句，这件事情是什么呢？这件事情就是 Q， 其实它就是一种口感而已，还包含有一个限定用法的关系子句。先行词是 textures， 后面的关系子句从 that 一直到全部句尾的地方，然后里面又带了一个限定用法的关系子句。先行词是 beef tendons，beef tendons 也就是牛腱， that 一直到 teeth 又是另外一个限定用法的关系子句。所以有时候句子很长啊，我们要知道它中间到底是多了限定用法关系子句，还是非限定用法关系子句，还是它有什么连接词 but and so 之类的，我们把它切开，这样就能够比较了解文意。好，不过啊，不管食物有多 Q 啦，我们都会觉得说这个东西好吃啊，就一定要 Q。好，那其实 Q 呢，我们刚刚说过，就是来自于台语啦。那它的发音因为跟 Q 就是一样，但是不限于台湾哦。其实亚洲有很多的食物都会广泛使用 Q 来描述这种好吃的口感。像比如说新加坡、印尼、马来西亚有一种9层糕，它就很 Q 啊，而且它的名气跟这种糕点的这种弹性的口感很重要啊，就是这 Q 的这一个很重要的例子。我们来看一下第三段最后一句这个地方，好，它是一个倒装句哦。第三段最后一句第5句，原本的主词出现在 be 动词后面，所以我们先把句子的 be 动词 is 找到，左右先打斜线。它倒装的是什么呢？我们要强调的是主词补语，很重要的就是根据它的这样子的一个 Q 的实例 equally important to its fame，这是我们要强调的主词补语 is 之后才出现了主词 the cake's springing texture another example of Q。 所以有时候主词补语必须要强调的时候，它放句首就直接由补语动词加主词，这样形成倒装。我们明天还会再谈谈 Q 这个东西，我们明天见咯，拜拜。
That's it, guys. Please come back for our next program. We're going to continue talking about the curious case of Q and focus in on some particular dishes. It'll be fun, especially if you like food like we do or you like to cook. So that's it for today. We're sure glad you joined us. Come back soon for English Digest. I'm Stephanie.
I'm Tom. Goodbye.
Bye.